Panic in Moscow. Ukrainian drones have attacked Taganrog again. There are explosions at the airfield. Russia is preparing for new special operations and has tripled the production of Iskanders. Meanwhile, Ukraine and the Council of Europe have signed a historic agreement. There will be a special tribunal for the Russian Federation. Putin is hiding from arrest and will not attend the BRICS summit. Meanwhile, the Russian elite are fighting over food at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. Greetings! My name is Anastasia Dmitrovskaya, and right now, here are the main stories. But first, like this video if you support Ukraine and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. Russia may be preparing an operation for Ukraine similar to the SBU's Pavutina special operation, since each side is now following the other's example. In fact, this was explained by former SBU officer and military expert Ivan Stupak.
Each side is copying the other's experience. The Russian Federation, without any doubt, will imitate everything that Ukraine has done. We had scooters, they took up mopeds. But here, look, there's an important point. They know exactly who needs to be eliminated. They understand perfectly well which explosive device is being planted for which serviceman. Basically, just like Ukraine does. And we have to understand that sooner or later, the Russian Federation will use the same method against us that Ukraine used against a large number of strategic aviation aircraft. I mean, Operation Web, so there is no ownership or patent right to this operation here. That is, the Russians can do more or less the same thing against Ukraine, and we should already have an antidote for such a scenario.
And what about you? Do you agree that the Russians could adapt and use something like the web against Ukraine? The commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrskyi, reported on the results of our military's work. Just imagine, in only 1 week from the 19th of June to 25, the defense forces struck 99 areas where enemy personnel, weapons, military equipment, depots, ammunition and command posts were concentrated. Let's thank our Cossacks for their lightning-fast work. Explosive, hot and absolutely enchanting. For the second night in a row, cotton has not been seen in the swamps. Moscow and the Moscow region caught fire on Thursday night. Unknown good drones visited there.
There he is. There he is. Mamajan.
And as is usually the case, the capital's airports were blanketed. The carpet plan was put into action, although the Russian authorities proudly declared that their powerful air defense shot everything down.
So basically, something just exploded here. That's it, the cause over there.
Taganrog also didn't get any sleep for 2 nights in a row. Reports say there were at least 15 explosions in the area. As they say, take 2. Last night, something landed there near the airfield.
Taganrog. At night, there was an attack to the west of the city, with the epicenter in the area of the airfield and the helicopter parking lot.
Drones also flew into the Kaluga region, which is why the covert plan was implemented at Kaluga airport as well. Drones were just as effective in the Kursk region. There was a strike on the location of the Russian armed forces there. Details are promised to be provided later. And returning to the topic of weapons upgrades, the enemy is not standing still either, and Russia has started attacking Ukraine with upgraded white Shaheds. This was reported by communications officer Syrskyi Flash.
It was equipped with an improved camera, a computing platform based on artificial intelligence, and radio communication, which allowed the operator to control it remotely from Russia. According to a Ukrainian drone expert, it also featured a new jamming protection technology produced in Iran.
The Associated Press, which actually cites Flash's words, spoke with American experts. The response was unanimous. The white drones are more advanced.
David Albright from the Washington Institute for Science and International Security added that previous versions of Shahed drones could not hit a moving target or change their trajectory after launch. They would fly in circles across Ukraine to home in on their target, which made them relatively easy to shoot down. However, the presence of radio communication on the drone means that the operator can control the UAV from Russia and select its target. Potentially, the operator could even control a large number of drones simultaneously.
Moreover, according to Flash, the new drones are not Iranian-made, but Russian-made.
Bezkresnov confirmed that the Russians have started using Shaheds with radio control, but he suggested that this is not an Iranian product, but a directly Russian one. The drone has a different color, which is characteristic specifically of Alabuga's products. According to the expert, we shouldn't expect serial production of either the white or black Iranian drones with EW modules. The thing is, the components for these drones are quite expensive.
If it seems to you that Russia is gradually moving away from Iranian Shahed assistance, you're not mistaken, because even the Financial Times writes that Russia no longer needs Iranian help to continue the war. Obviously, that's why the Kremlin is so actively shifting to the production and use of its own drones, including strike analogs of the Shaheds. And according to Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation, Russia is betting on drones as it plans future attacks.
But again, strategic aviation still retains the capability to carry out massive strikes, although the enemy has moved away from this strategy and has mostly replaced cruise missiles for use in Ukraine with Shaheds, Jiran drones, and certain decoys like the Gerbera and others. The main focus is now on UAVs. They're cheaper than missiles, and the missiles are being stockpiled.
So there will not be fewer Russian attacks, which means it won't get any safer either. That's why the State Emergency Service reminds us that the two walls rule no longer works.
Because this rule was established quite a long time ago. It was relevant for shrapnel threats and explosions at a distance, but modern warfare is completely different, and there are plenty of weapons now that can penetrate not just two walls, but destroy entire sections of apartment buildings, private homes, and other structures. People still believe that staying at home to wait things out is a cure-all. However, the enemy is not only increasing the number of attack drones, but also strengthening their warheads, said Pavlo Petrov, spokesperson for the Kyiv State Emergency Service, on the air of Kyiv 24.
So take care of your safety and respond to air raid alerts. During the full-scale war against Ukraine, Russia has tripled the production of Iskander missiles. The Russian Federation has been able to significantly increase the production of Iskander operational tactical missiles thanks to intermediaries who purchased the necessary equipment abroad. In 2024 alone, the enemy has produced more than 700 of these missiles. This is 3 times more than the previous year. Investigators from the Kyiv Independent report that a key role in ramping up missile production was played by equipment supplies from China, Taiwan, and Belarus. The supplies themselves were carried out through a network of little-known private intermediary companies. Meanwhile, the main missile manufacturer in Russia has become the Votkinsk plant. And not only is this plant actively operating despite sanctions, it is also increasing production. At the same time, the Votkinsk plant is expanding its production capacity. 2 new workshops have been built, and the workforce has increased by 2,500 employees. This is happening against the backdrop of the intensive use of Iskanders against Ukraine. In 2024, Russia carried out 245 missile attacks with these systems 4.5 times more than the previous year. Just in the first half of the year, 180 strikes have already been recorded.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And what do you think, would it be fair to impose sanctions on countries that help Russia circumvent sanctions? Putin will attack NATO, but because the alliance is much stronger, the Russian Federation will test the bloc with so-called hybrid attacks. In fact, such predictions were voiced in an interview with Telegraph by Norway's Minister of Defense Tore Sandvik. Tor Sandvik believes that the Russian dictator will use the salami slicing tactic. He will test NATO's response through hybrid methods, cyber attacks and threats to underwater infrastructure. This will be a challenge because all of this is below the threshold of war. And this is being done to divide us, to make us weaker in various ways. I think we need to watch the energy sector very closely because Putin is an expert in energy. He knows everything about energy markets, especially oil and gas. And we depend on all of this much more than we realize, the official noted. Sandvik also says that Putin will try to manipulate energy systems and that this could be the final step before a direct war or before Russia attempts to test NATO. So NATO must already be actively implementing the so-called policy of deterrence. That is why it is so important to reach defense spending of 5% of GDP. This is necessary both to strengthen the resilience of the civil societies of NATO member countries, to demonstrate military capability, and to show that if Putin tries to challenge the bloc militarily, he will be met with every means available. And here, as much as we might not want to believe it, Sandvik's forecast now seems quite realistic to me. What do you think, will Russia actually dare to attack NATO? We want peace, they said. And the key word here is said, because as you know, it has become customary that what the Kremlin says is one thing, but what they do is completely different. So, against the backdrop of statements about striving for peace, Putin has increased Russian budget spending by more than $10 billion. And what's interesting is that this increase in spending happened against the backdrop of a record budget deficit in the Russian Federation. Despite the Kremlin's loud claims about the resilience of the economy, GDP growth, and the ineffectiveness of sanctions, the real figures show the opposite. The country is sinking deeper into debt, and moreover, the additional spending is not being directed towards supporting the economy or the population, but rather toward the military and security apparatus. For ordinary Russians, this means new taxes, inflation, rising prices, and a further decline in the standard of living, as noted by the Center for Countering Disinformation. Another piece of evidence that Russia's talk of peace is nothing but loud declarations is that North Korea is preparing to send a new batch of soldiers to Russia. North Korea may send additional troops to Russia to participate in the war against Ukraine in July or August. In addition, Russia has withdrawn a significant portion of its troops from the Kaliningrad region for, quote, involvement in other missions. However, we all understand what exactly these other missions might refer to. For example, one of the latest major redeployments of forces from this region was due to the advance of Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region. Currently, this redeployment of forces may be driven by the Russian summer offensive in Ukraine. The Hague is waiting. Ukraine and the Council of Europe have signed an agreement on a special tribunal to investigate crimes of Russian aggression against Ukraine.
This crime must be prosecuted clearly and fairly. The world needs an honest historical verdict so that everyone responsible for this war is held accountable. And not only because we all see what is happening in Ukraine, but also through due legal process. It was right here in this assembly that the first call for the creation of such a tribunal was made. This idea was endorsed here, and now it is gaining real support from partner countries in Europe and beyond.
From now on, in addition to the International Criminal Court, the newly established special tribunal will also be able to conduct investigations against Putin. The tribunal will be able to pass verdicts even without the presence of the accused.
Yes, there is still a long road ahead, and we truly understand that. Today's agreement to establish the tribunal is only the beginning, and now we need to take real steps to make it operational. And for this, strong political and legal cooperation is needed to ensure justice for every Russian war criminal, including Putin. And this is the path we must follow all the way to real charges and real verdicts. And I urge you to remain active and maintain your leadership just as you have done so far. Some people ask, quite understandably, whether it is really possible to establish a tribunal. Wouldn't it be better to focus entirely on weapons, technology, and drones? Of course, military support for Ukraine, tough sanctions against Russia, and political pressure on the aggressor, all of this is important, and these are the things that make Russia feel the real cost of this war. And yes, the aggressor must lose, and we are working towards that. The lives of Ukrainians must be protected, and I thank everyone who supports our defense. But justice is also important, and it must work in such a way that war criminals cannot hide anywhere, neither in Europe nor elsewhere.
But if it concerns the highest leadership of the state, then passing verdicts will only be possible after they lose their positions. However, despite all the buts, this decision is historic because it makes a Nuremberg for Putin a reality. And the more such decisions there are, the more Putin is afraid. And here is the proof. Because of the arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court, the bunker dwarf refuses to attend the summit of his favorite organization, BRICS.
I can confidently state that the esteemed president is fully prepared to actively participate in all the significant and principal events of this highly anticipated summit. connecting and engaging with attendees remotely through a secure and reliable video link. This is primarily due to certain significant weather-related difficulties and challenges within the broader context, specifically in the context of the stringent IMF requirements and conditions, and more specifically in this particular context, the Brazilian government was unfortunately unable to take a clear and decisive position that would effectively allow for the necessary actions. Our esteemed president is indeed planning to participate in this important meeting, and therefore I can confidently state that the president will participate via video conference, yes, but Brazil will be fully and officially represented on site by the foreign minister, who will be present in person.
This is not the first meeting Putin has missed due to so-called difficulties. Now it's Brazil, and in 2023 it was South Africa. These countries are members of the ICC and are obligated to arrest Putin. Although, I must admit, there are also countries that ignore ICC decisions, like Mongolia, for example, where Putin traveled without any problems last year. But as we can see, there are fewer people among Putin's partners, and decisions like the ICC warrant and the creation of a special tribunal contribute to this. It seems there is a new trend in Russia. They've already rewritten their own history textbooks, and now they're turning their attention to history textbooks in CIS countries. So the Russian Minister of Education, Sergei Kravtsov, has announced that there are problems with the history textbooks in CIS countries. In fact, Moscow has never hidden its dissatisfaction with the negative portrayal of the Soviet past in these textbooks. As a result, Kravtsov stated that the Kremlin is already holding talks with relevant ministers about, quote, coordinating a unified approach to interpreting our shared past. Translated from diplomatic language, this means an attempt to impose on other countries a version of history that benefits the Kremlin. The war in Ukraine has triggered a large-scale wave of historical censorship within Russia itself. Now, Moscow is trying to extend this policy to other countries as well, disguising it with slogans about a unified educational space and the mental unity of Eurasia. And while the Kremlin is dealing with urgent matters, for ordinary Russians, urgent matters look a bit different. So for a few pieces of bread, they ask for 23 rubles. That's about 10 hryvnias. Well, at least that explains the excitement of the Russian elites at the buffet during the St. Petersburg Economic Forum.
Back, I said.
In short, everything is stable in Russia. The authorities have their own urgent issues, while the people have completely different urgent issues. Like this video to support what we do, and be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss the next episodes. See you!